All right, I'll call this meeting of the Plan Commission to order. Madam Secretary, could we have a roll call?
Mr. Ackerson?
Here.
Mr. Fell?
Here.
Mr. Fitch?
Here.
Mr. Hopkins?
Here.
Mr. Otto?
Here.
Mr. Storr?
Here.
Mr. Trail?
Here.
Mr. Turner?
Here.
We do have a quorum. Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda? Approval of the minutes. Minutes from the January 5th, 2017 regular Plan Commission meeting. Do I have a motion or a second? So moved by Mr. Ackerson. Second, Mr. Fell. Any changes? Nope. All right. Hearing that, we will approve these on a voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The minutes are approved. Any communications? We have a packet of communications from concerned residents. I won't go into any of the details. We can get to some of that in the study session. I will say that these will be entered into the record, and they are in opposition to the proposal as it stands. No continued public hearings, no old business. We have a new public hearing that I will open, and then this will be continued to the February 9th Plan Commission meeting. This is Plan Case 2297M16 and Annexation Case 2016A02. A proposed annexation agreement between the city and the Urbana-Champaign Sanitary District, including rezoning from County R2 to City IN1, a .338-acre parcel located at 2912 East Main Street. And we'll take that up at our next regular meeting in February 9th. New business. We have a request by Abigail Frank and Amber Barnhart. This is Plan Case 858AM16. Request by Abigail Frank, Amber Barnhart, Trent Barnhart, and Donald Barnhart to amend the county zoning map. This is a county case. On 4 different tracts of land, totaling 35.15 acres at 1433 East Old Church Road, from County AG1 to County AG2, in order to operate a proposed special use with an associated waiver in a related county plan case. So, Mr. Marks, whenever you're ready.
First, I'd like to note that there is, on the memorandum, there is a typo. It should read Case 858AM16 as opposed to the one that was printed.
I think that's what we got. 858AM16.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're good.
So this is a request going before the Champaign County Zoning Board of Appeals for a rezoning and a special use permit for the subject properties involved, about 35 acres total at 1413 East Old Church Road, that near the intersection of South Filer Road and Old Church Road, to rezone the properties from County AG1 Agriculture Zoning District to County AG2 Agriculture Zoning District. This particular measure is not for the special use permit, but for whether the city would desire to draft a resolution, a protest for the rezoning request. The subject property is part of a larger farm that was owned by the applicants and their family. It was subdivided around 2002. Property to the west was set aside for a nature preserve, the Barnhart Prairie Preserve. A few parts of the land were turned into, were kept as farmland. There was a house as well and a barn. The petitioners are requesting that a rezoning and a special use permit so that they may put an event center at the property. They would take the barn and significantly rehab it, basically update it so that it could host private events such as weddings, receptions, as well as luncheons, etc. for as many as 350 patrons, with the creation of 70 parking spots with the ability to expand up to 165 as well. The parcels are outside of the city limits, but because they are within 1.5 miles of the city boundary, they fall within what's called the extraterritorial jurisdiction, and called the ETJ for short. That means that any county parcel within the ETJ has the city has a certain amount of discretion in terms of how parcels are subdivided, or if rezoning requests are submitted to the county. The ETJ stretches across the northern part of the subject properties, so therefore the city does have a right to file a protest with the county if it deems so. To quickly review, if the Plan Commission recommended to the City Council and the City Council drafted a resolution of protest and filed it to the Champaign County Zoning Board of Appeals, the CCZBA would need to approve the project with 3/4 of a vote as opposed to just a simple majority. It's worth noting that back in 2002, when the properties were subdivided amongst the family members, the parcels involved belonged to 2 different family members, both of whom are listed as petitioners, Donald Barnhart and Amber Barnhart. The properties were split without a required subdivision submitted to the city. So therefore, there are issues of 2 of the parcels not being compliant with the city's subdivision ordinance. One parcel is too small; it's only 1 acre. It must be at least 5 acres, and it is not accessible to a public right-of-way. That same goes with that larger property that is kind of looks like a jigsaw piece, sort of extending around the flag lot. That parcel is also not immediately does not have frontage along a public right-of-way. So the city has been working with the county staff as well as the petitioner to ensure that a proper subdivision will occur in the event of that the Champaign County Zoning Board of Appeals approves any rezoning or special use permit. The ways to remediate the non-compliance would be to make that one parcel that's just 1 acre larger, or by simply combining it with another parcel, so you have all the parcels are at least 5 acres, and possibly combining them so that they all have access to a frontage along Old Church Road. So all the subject properties and all the surrounding property is zoned County AG1 agricultural. The petitioners are requesting to rezone the subject properties to County AG2 agricultural. The distinction is that County AG1 is a strict agricultural use. It's designed to just allow things like farming and open space. AG2 is meant to allow more commercial type uses on agricultural properties that are, make no mistake, of a rural nature, such as an event center or such as a farm supply store or things of that. So it does allow, if the properties were rezoned to AG2, it would open them up slightly more to other commercial uses. That said, the reason that the petitioners are requesting a rezoning is because the use that they would like to propose for the properties, which under the Champaign County zoning ordinance is determined as private indoor recreational development and outdoor commercial recreational enterprise, are only allowed in AG2 as opposed to AG1. So they submitted a map amendment, rezoning application, as well as a special use permit application to be heard concurrently. with the, excuse me, with the special use permit to be approved only after the rezoning application is approved at the same meeting. The Champaign County Zoning Board of Appeals met last week to discuss the case. They voted to continue the case to their next meeting on January 26th, mainly to allow for more time to resolve the subdivision issues with the subject properties. The applicant has with Champaign County has been working to put together a proposal for a new subdivision that would allow that would have the properties in compliance with the City of Urbana's subdivision code, but that is still being worked on at this moment. They have not submitted an application to the city for any subdivision yet. So the LaSalle criteria can be found in the memorandum for the county memorandum that was included. The city has the option, the Plan Commission has the option of forwarding the case to the City Council with a recommendation of no protest. They may forward the case with a recommendation of no protest contingent upon specific provisions to be identified, or they may forward the plan case to the City Council with a recommendation of protest. Staff recommendation is to defeat a resolution of protest as presented. Any questions?
Any questions of Mr. Garcia?
Mr. Marks.
Oh, Mr. Marks.
It's okay.
You all look alike in plan. No questions? I think Mr. Trail.
Can you tell me exactly what a private Illinois nature preserve is? And what
It-
the rules are?
I believe the property is still owned by the respective property owners, but it is a nature preserve that is, I believe, managed by a public or partially public entity. I would have to,
It's not really germane
the
to the
name.
question, so we didn't look into that.
Seems to be a big kind of reason for their argument of why an event center here and all of that, and so I'm just curious what exactly this is. I mean, could it go back to agricultural use in 3 years if, I mean, just what is it?
I mean, the best we can do is find out, but
Collect that information, yeah.
Okay.
And depending on what happens here, either bring it back to us if it should get continued or have it ready for the city council.
I am not 100% certain, but the two parcels shown are actually controlled by the Salamander Conservation District. The back part of the property is still owned by the Barnhart family, but it's an designated Illinois nature preserves in the nature preserve set of places that have certain protections. Exactly what the easement is, I don't know.
Is that a permanent designation or is that a permanent designation?
I believe so. I mean, I've been there. It's a open access to the public nature preserve that is a great place to go walk in a prairie. And the front part is actually under public control. The back part, I believe, is general public open access, but owned by the family.
All right, further questions? Mr. Storr?
Yeah, just because I've been, pardon me, just because I've been doing some things with another project that has to do with wind, notice that this is actually downwind of the beef, cattle, and sheep barns. And I kind of fear that people kind of, especially city folks, don't necessarily appreciate smells of and odors that are common in the more rural parts.
Is there a question in there?
Well, I'm just kind of concerned about whether this will create some sort of a conflict down the line if this becomes some sort of a public use area that they'll raise a bunch of complaints about odors.
Thank you for noting that. Mr. Trail?
Is there anything in the AG2 zoning that would limit the size of this event center if it did get a special use permit, other than the language of the special use?
I would have to check back with the specifics of County AG2 zoning standards, but it's still, I would imagine it's still held to the same. It's held to certain, use restrictions, development restrictions, like any other zoning district would be.
And since they would require a special use permit for this use, it would be approved to be as presented. So depending on how the county evaluates deviations from that, it may need to go back through their process to get approved if it wants to grow, for instance.
So there's really no limits other than the language of the special use permit?
Well, other than traditional zoning limits like the setbacks and the parking and all of that. But I think in this case, the special use permit would be the more restrictive of those regulations.
Further questions? Mr. Fowle?
Can you clarify how this was subdivided previously?
So the city's ETJ strikes about halfway through the highlighted parcels right there. It was extended down towards that way around middle of 2001. These subject properties were subdivided up from a family farm, I think it was from their father, middle of 2002. So the properties were probably subdivided without the knowledge that the ETJ did in fact extend that far. That doesn't change the fact that they were still required to submit a subdivision application.
So some of these parcels are non-conforming in size.
That's correct.
If we I'll say approve this rezoning, are we overlooking the fact that they should be made conforming before we do that?
Well, the county and the application the county and the applicants are both working with us to come forward with, they're seeking our input, we're providing input, and there's communication back and forth to make sure that they will be submitting a subdivision application, and the county, I believe, has the ability to put that as a condition for either their rezoning or for their special use permits that such is accomplished for the use to be permitted.
And the county did commit that they would not give a certificate of occupancy before this issue is resolved. That was satisfactory to us.
Any further questions? Mr. Turner?
I guess in looking at this, for me, since I'm kind of a Urbana Southsider myself, I guess I worry a little bit about the potential traffic, late night traffic down Curtis and
I will
Philo.
point out that that's part of their special use permit. That's not part of the rezoning. The rezoning is really the only thing that you can, that we have the ability to protest. So we have provided some comments about things like make sure traffic works and sanitary sewer. But I just wanted to remind you that the rezoning itself is really the only issue at hand today.
Mr. Trail, did you have something else? That was it? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. It's the zoning case at this point, and we'll not, I don't know, will we ever get to hear a chance to hear the special use permit in this kind of a situation?
That's out of our jurisdiction.
Sure. All right, any further questions? Nope. Well, thank you, Mr. Marks. All right, discussion. Do we, oh, I'm sorry. I skipped right over that. Yeah, yeah, it's a public hearing. Therefore, does anybody wish to address the Plan Commission on this case? Thank you, and in that case, we will turn to discussion now. Any thoughts? Or proceed straight to a motion, or concerns?
Well, concerns, I mean, just, other than the proximity of this nature preserve, I mean, otherwise it's just another, we want to put something out on cheap land, and, you know, we assume everyone will build roads to it and all of that for us so that we can, you know, it's just more sprawl. That's why I'm so curious about the nature of the nature preserve. Is it permanent? You know, would a special use permit require public access to the lot for those who want to visit the preserve? You know, would they be able to close it during events? And I mean, I'm just very curious about the way the whole interaction here that would, you know, make me think that we wouldn't oppose this. I just, you know, I don't see any reason to keep approving things developed, you know, when, I mean, there's other event venues. I mean,
Well, to clarify that point, and it might be splitting hairs, but we're not actually approving it. We're advising the council not to oppose it, which is
right. It's our
yeah,
opportunity
sure.
to express our opposition to
Sure.
this type of activity
Right,
for those of us who might oppose it.
Mr.
We had
Otto.
an issue similar to this on the north edge of Urbana, where someone wanted a special events thing and so on, and then the issue is too close to town. The noise is going to carry. We can't have it both ways. We can't say you can't do it in town, you can't do it out of town. And there are comments attached to it, and none of the comments opposed. I did. There are comments attached. None of them are opposed to the project, or the rezoning.
Sure.
The rezoning. I'm ready to go ahead.
I do have some of Mr. Trail's concerns, actually, and I would be ready to go ahead, but I want to just ask, you know, what is our exposure to if this subdivision thing doesn't happen? The city of Champaign or the county has given you assurances that it won't go forward until these issues are resolved. I just maybe if you could speak to that a little bit, and then you know, what's the rush? Is there some reason we need to weigh in now?
Well, we as a city are constrained in that we need, if we were to protest as a city council would need to make that decision, and we'd need to convey that decision. I believe it's 15 days before their county board meeting. So I don't have their new schedule since it was continued from the last ZBA. I'm not sure if it'll still make the same county board meeting, but that date initially meant that we needed to have a council decision at the council's first meeting in February in order to make the county schedule. Otherwise, we would give up our right to protest. So there is some timeliness here.
Logistics, yeah. Mr. Otto?
I mean, if we're not comfortable with the county staff's commitment to the city staff, that they won't let it go forward without bringing it into conformity, why don't we go to B with a recommendation of no protest contingent upon the plots being brought into conformity with the Subdivision Act? That would strengthen it.
It would. I mean, I like it. Is that almost a motion?
That's a motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, now let's get clear what has been moved. Mr. Otto, if you want to just restate that.
That we forward the plan case to City Council with recommendation of no protest contingent upon the subject properties being brought into conformity with the Subdivision Act.
And that was motion by Mr. Otto, seconded by Mr. Hopkins. Any further discussion? Nope.
I'll just repeat that I think that it's awfully close to the animal operation, and
You don't want to have a wedding.
past experience has been, you're gonna get complaints.
Mr. Otto, and then I think Mr. Trail had that.
if no one leases the property for a wedding, that's not our problem, but Illinois has a Right to Farm Act, and so the complaints will fall on deaf ears.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, my only other concern is that to get some clarity on what the relationship is between this prairie preserve and, I mean, anything, whether parking would have to remain open. I mean, I'm just not certain how this all fits together. So,
Great, that's in the record, and as I said earlier, I think it would be great if you could bring some clarity to the council on that. So, no further discussion. Let's have a roll call.
Mr. Fell,
Yes.
Mr. Fitch,
Yes.
Mr. Hopkins, Mr. Otto,
Yes.
Mr. Storr,
No.
Mr. Trail,
No.
Mr. Turner, and Mr. Ackerson.
Yes.
So what was that, 5-3?
5-3.
5-3. So the motion to have a no, defeat a motion of protest with conditions will be forwarded to the council. I didn't say that very well, but I hope you can translate it. All right. So now, is there anybody wishes to address the Plan Commission right now? It's our usual audience participation. This will not preclude participation in the staff report section. Mr. Otto?
I just want to clarify, so
Yeah.
they will have an opportunity after the presentation to participate?
Correct.
Because that's not on the agenda, it just says staff.
You know, it's an interesting question, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. Okay, so now we have a staff report, and this staff report is concerning.
Actually, that's a study session, I
It's
think.
a study. I'm sorry. Do we have a staff report?
Nothing other than to introduce the planner, Marcus Ricci, who started with us at the end of October. I think many of you met him individually, but we're happy to have him here.
Great. Welcome. I'm sorry. Now, we do have a study session. This is a presentation by the applicant for a proposed planned unit development at Lincoln Avenue and Nevada Street. I want to talk about, this is a study session. It's not technically a public hearing. There won't be presentation of evidence and cross-examination. I would remind the plan commissioners, per our bylaws, you can't take a public position on something that can be or will be a public hearing without having to recuse yourself from said case. So feel free, of course, to discuss, but don't take a public position on something that we're going to have to probably have a formal public hearing on later. And there will be some time for public participation after the presentation. We won't have any rebuttal or cross-examination, so I would kind of urge you to kind of follow the same guidelines that we're following. You know, you're not bound by the same bylaws that we are, but there will be a public hearing presumably at some point, and then we'll follow all the requirements, and you'll have full chance to give us your opinion. So if we could go down to the presentation.
While the applicant team is assembling, I'll just take a moment to update everyone on where we are in the process with this. We did receive application materials. It has not been analyzed yet by the staff. In fact, it hasn't completed its completeness review yet. So we wanted to have this meeting at this stage to get a little bit of input, to get some of your questions out on the table before we complete our analysis or before we even complete our completeness check, so that if there are some other things that we need to request, that we can do that at this stage. So that's really all. I just wanted to give you an idea on where we are in the process.
Thank you, Mr. Otto.
Since Mr. Fell was the architect on the previous proposal on this plot, is there any issue of conflict of interest for him to participate on a new proposal?
There would not be technically any conflict of interest. We can talk about that with our city attorney when it comes time for the public hearing. However, you may find that he has knowledge that might help your questioning, for instance, with this during the study session phase. I'm not, technically no conflict of interest, but I'll leave that up to him and to make that final decision.
Thank you.
I
Mr. Fell?
would like to point out to the commission and the audience, the first time I've heard about this project was Friday when I opened the agenda. I heard absolutely nothing about this before that. Okay?
Mr.
Just
Chair.
that you no longer have any financial
No.
employment, any business link at any with the petitioner or on this or this particular thing
Correct,
anymore.
yes.
Okay.
Great. Glad we got that on the record, and again, we'll review further when the case actually becomes a hearing. So please, if you could begin your presentation by introducing yourself so we can get your names in the record, that'd be great.
All right. My name is Josh Daly, and I'm president of Mode 3 Architecture. We're located in Champaign, Illinois.
Jacob Unzicker with Mode 3, vice president with Mode 3 Architecture. I was born and raised in Champaign. I'm a Urbana resident now for the last almost 13 years.
Good for you.
I defected and went to St. Joseph.
Oh. Great. Well, gentlemen, please proceed.
All right. As Lori introduced, we're here tonight to present a project that we've been working on. Our client has hired us here to take a look at a project located at the corner of Nevada and Lincoln. Again, this is an informational presentation to show you what we've come up with here. And we'd like to hit on some topics this evening to kind of summarize what we've done. Most notably, the key components to what we'd like to present are things that we feel are important for everyone to know. Number one is the design process, what we have to go through starting with the planned unit development process, segue into features of current design, and then our summary of requested waivers for this project as a PUD, and a comparison to the previous PUD application, so you can see the difference between the one that was previously submitted.
So as Josh mentioned, the first thing we wanted to talk about was design process. And since this project has been presented the last time, of course the biggest thing that we had to go off of was that there were several concerns raised the last time about certain aspects of the project, including the size of it, density, vehicular traffic, and that sort of thing. So number one in our design process was to take all of those into account before proceeding any further, and it kind of forced us to go back and look at things with a fresh perspective. And then also, just so that there could be an appreciation of the challenge here, I think everybody kind of knows this already, but this particular site does pose some challenges because of its location. If we could there are several constraints that we're up against, but if we could boil it down to two kind of things that are, I wouldn't say they're in opposition to each other, but there can be a tendency for things to go one way or the other, is that there is a comprehensive plan that was passed by the city of Urbana, and it labels this particular section of property, or these parcels, as high density residential in terms of the long-term future land use, and that makes it attractive to a developer to want to develop that property. At the same time, this neighborhood that it's in, or the location of this particular property in relationship to the greater neighborhood, this is a neighborhood that is also talked about in the comprehensive plan as needing to have its character preserved. And the character that is there is one of lower density. It's not a high density area, and so we have these forces kind of coming together, where we have a tendency for there to need to be some sort of transition between the campus area and the lower density residential area. And of course, this property is right in where those come together. So there are some challenges. So what we have tried to do, though, is to go keeping all of the concerns in mind for not only the developer but the neighborhood people and the city. So there are several things we had to kind of balance with this, but what we're presenting is our best effort to try to keep all of these things in balance. The last time that the project was presented, it was a larger size. We've done some things to reduce the size of the project, number one. That was a big concern. There's some other issues that we'll touch on that we've tried to implement that were of concern the last time around as well. But just to make you aware that we have used the Lincoln Busey design guidelines, the corridor guidelines, to help develop the exterior look of the building and the size and some of those other features. We'll get into more detail with that later, but we'll start with the building plans.
So to orient everybody with this location, what we have up now is an overall 10,000-foot view of the area. So Lincoln Avenue is running north-south. Nevada Street is just to the north of this parcel. So this is an assemblage of properties that's kind of an L shape. The bulk of it fronts the corner of Lincoln and Nevada. Of course, directly across the street is predominantly university structures. And then directly surrounding is a fraternity and another multifamily to the south, multifamily to the north. And then, of course, getting over onto Busey, you start to get into single family. So it is kind of a mix, as Jacob was touching on, of different forces coming together here on this particular strip, directly fronting Lincoln. Zooming in further, kind of an enlarged view of this plan, I would call this a ground level plan and a site plan. Of course, Lincoln is on your left, north-south, and then Nevada's on the north. I'll let Jacob.
So the building size previously was approximately 80,000 square feet. The current building design has been reduced from that by over 50%. It's about 38,000 square feet at this time. Most of that is because the height of the building has been reduced as well. We'll look at some elevations and exterior views later on that'll demonstrate that. But just in general, the size of the building has come down. But in terms of how the building is situated on the site, one of the first things that we tried to do was preserve this very large, mature tree at the corner of Lincoln and Nevada, which, if I'm thinking about the character of the neighborhood, one of the major aspects of it is the mature trees there, the population of those types of trees. And so this seemed like that was a no-brainer that we should keep that tree there. So we have kept that and have maintained a distance away from it so that we can construct our building without harming it, so that it stays. And actually it's developed into a nice little place at the corner where residents and the neighborhood could kind of pass through there or stay and appreciate it. In addition to that, we have to provide some level of parking at this site, and we know that there is concern on about vehicles at this site, and we did not want those to be visible. We've followed the guidelines in terms of how to keep parking away from visibility. So it's basically tucked in behind the building. The building is fronting it on 3 sides, and in addition to that, we have buffer and physical fence screening on the other sides to hide that. We have also, along Lincoln Avenue, have tried to provide a more welcoming facade. We've introduced walk-up entrances to the building that actually go directly out and provide a greater level of connectivity with the public way at Lincoln Avenue. And these porches, these stoops that we're showing here, actually were a feature that reminded us of a lot of the other residential structures that are close by. This building obviously is on the east side of Lincoln, so we felt like it was important to draw from a lot of the residential features and have it fit more with that side as opposed to the other side of Lincoln Avenue. But in essentially the way the building is laid out is in a C shape, and it basically stacks vertically. There is a ground floor level which is raised. You get access to it. You can access that from a main entrance to the building near the corner of Lincoln and Nevada, a common entry where you can access an elevator or stairs. But then in addition to that, there are residential entrances on the outside of the building, which gives the building a feel of being several smaller structures that are just closely grouped instead of one larger facility. We also try to group the open space in larger clusters on the site. So we have kind of two major areas where there's a significant amount of open space, and those are at the corner where we have the tree. And then in addition to that, we've also kept the building back where we have this kind of extended leg that goes back to the east on the southeast portion of this parcel. And we've decided to kind of leave that alone and not build upon it and keep that as a outdoor activity space. So we also felt that was important because it kind of distances the mass of the building from the neighborhood moving to the east. But this is we were calling this a 3.5-story structure because the first level is about a half story above the surrounding grade. There is a level that's submerged below grade. Again, you'd access that by elevator or stairs. And then there are 3 floors then above grade.
So getting back to what Jacob touched on a little bit about exterior appearance, let's face it, this is an eclectic mix of structures in this neighborhood and area. On the west side of Lincoln, it's predominantly university, as I mentioned, but going on the east side and further south, further north, you have quite a mixed bag of structures, architectural styles, ranging from an English Tudor, Greek Revival, quasi, I'd call it Queen Anne, and then you've got Craftsman, just about everything. And then ultra modern. It's all mixed together in one eclectic mix. So we thought we would take a walk around the neighborhood. We did extensively. And we kind of put our hearts into this in terms of finding some things that we could respectfully borrow and respectfully and use it as a complement to some of these things. For example, looking at this slide, you've got a Greek Revival pediment, the gable on just about every structure. Grouped windows is another aspect that we thought was nice because a lot of older homes have grouped windows that used to let lots of light and air into rooms and spaces. So we've incorporated that aspect into the design. Covered or uncovered porches. I don't really see too many homes, or for that matter, new construction, such as this example on the top there, that doesn't have some kind of covered or uncovered porch or stoop that has direct access to a sidewalk. Often these are already encroaching in a front yard setback, grandfathered in, of course, but that kind of an element on these buildings gives the neighborhood its character. That's what gives it its feel. So with that, we tried to take some of those elements and then segueing into looking at some of those examples, we felt it was important to try to use some of those materials as well. We felt using there's cedar shingles on some areas, others it's mostly asphalt shingles, which is durable, makes sense. Brick veneer is predominant on a lot of structures, so we try to incorporate that as well. Some of it will go all the way up, some will be different colors, and we tried to use that feature extensively. The other thing is some of the older homes in the neighborhood have a base on them, a water table I would call it, that is either stone, brick, other materials. So we try to incorporate that as well as a design feature to again complement and respect some of the vocabulary and the context of the neighborhood and the streetscape. And lastly, there's a mixed bag of, you got shakes, shingles, siding products, paneling, wood, stucco, and other things. So we were trying to use some of those as a key component into how to break up the facade of this building and make it an interesting rhythm so that it's not just a plain facade, and try to incorporate those elements.
Yeah, that was kind of an advantage to have that range of materials, because we know one of the desires of the guidelines, the Lincoln-Busey corridor guidelines, is to have facades that are well subdivided, and they have variety. They're not just monotonous. So we have utilized, I think, a good mix of those materials on the facade, and also used some of the forms that we noticed around the neighborhood, namely the projected bays, and then also gable roofs. We've got bracketing shown that kind of harkens to the building that's to the south on Lincoln, and those types of features, along with brick. In addition to that, the stoops, I just think helps this to feel more like it's a group of smaller structures instead of one large facility. So the views that we're showing obviously are the most prominent views. This one on the screen currently is of the Lincoln Avenue facade looking east from the intersection with the Nevada on the west side of Lincoln. We have these very nice traffic lights across there. There's several of those, and we have not shown in this drawing, we haven't shown the overhead power lines, which do exist there as well. The intent there is to work with the utility to try to get that rerouted, because currently it actually bisects the site, and we feel it would be a nice feature if we could get that rerouted, and if it could be underground, that would also be very nice. Moving on to the Nevada street side, this facade also uses a similar type of materials and features as the Lincoln Avenue side. This is where the entrance for parking would be located, and as you can see, we've tried to incorporate the entrance to the parking area incorporate that in with the massing of the building, so that it's not a really prominent feature. It's more hidden. You can also, in this view, you can see the entrance, the common entrance to the building, which is kind of overshadowed by this really nice tree. We feel like that space with the tree there is really nice, and there'll be a lot of nice shade, and it'd be a really nice place to go. We also would intend to develop the grounds around the building with a lot of nice landscaping to complement the rest of the neighborhood, and to kind of soften the base of this building. We also have gone out of our way to create more bike parking than is required in the zoning requirements. So we actually, where I believe the number of bike spaces that were required is, I think it's 15 for this project. We've actually provided 40 spaces. And one of the places that we wanted to provide parking is along Nevada. And then in addition to that, provide a bike repair station that would be available to the community as well. Because that's, in a way, we're trying to promote the use of bicycles over use of vehicles. This graphic is a two-dimensional representation or orthographic view of the elevation along Lincoln Avenue to illustrate the height comparison to the structure to the south at 808 South Lincoln Avenue. The proposed structure that we're for our design is 41 feet to the very top of the very utmost part of the roof. The zoning requirement for this type of roof we would not have to measure to that point, but for the sake of not confusing anybody in any of these diagrams, we've just decided to show what the very top elevation dimension is. So in our case, there would not be a true pitched roof on the top of this. It would be a flat roof, but we would provide a mansard type screen around the entire building, which would be approximately 4 feet above the actual roof, and that would hide any kind of rooftop mechanical equipment, so that would not be visible. But as you can see in this diagram, the adjacent structure on 808 South Lincoln is approximately 38 feet to the top of the parapet, and to the very top of our project would be approximately 41 feet. The waiver that's being requested, the text of the proposal said 43 feet. I don't believe we would have to ask for 43 feet because, as I said, the actual roof height is lower than that. But anyway, so that comparison is along Lincoln Avenue, and then to show the comparison in height along Nevada, the next adjacent structure is about 32 feet. That is a gabled roof. And then along that side, the roof for our proposed design is actually about 40 feet. The previous proposal was much taller. It was proposed at about 56.5 feet. And then this is just a list of some of the other nearby multifamily or residential structures in close proximity and their corresponding heights. So I feel like now the height of this proposed project is much more in line with the surrounding context.
So before I get into this next topic, so what we've done here is try to take a project that is meeting a high density per the comprehensive plan, but we are trying to bring the building down with a half level below grade. So the below grade units will still have windows, will still have little rails around these window wells that could be of a wrought iron character, something like that. The stoops would have railings on them that would be long lasting. And each stoop would be just for one single apartment. I want to clarify. It would not be used for every single floor. That's just for one apartment. So that same apartment also has an access on the back as well for accessibility reasons. So it is purely just to try to connect the ground level units as best as possible to the pedestrian way to give it a more of a character and a feel in line with some of the other structures in the neighborhood. The parameters that we've had to deal with here are, of course, the tree And then on the south side, as Jacob alluded to, there's a utility easement we're going to take care of, and we created a side yard there that we would landscape, and then that leads into this easternmost portion. And the reason, again, for bringing the building down a little bit is also for shadow and light. We don't want to have a large shadow presence during any time of day on any adjacent property. That's another reason to bring it down. That's why we were emphasizing the height. So the next element of this project that we'd like to talk through is traffic strategies. I think it's an important feature of this project. The location of this project is right across the street from the university. There are ideas here that we would like to promote on this project is not the use of cars. We want people to use the sidewalks. We have mass transit. We have bike trails that are put up all over this city, and we want people to use it. It is something that is, I think, supposed to be, and it's what Champaign is doing. It's what Urbana is doing, and this is a development that could readily use pedestrian and bicycle and mass transit. So we like to tuck the cars behind. We don't want to see them. I don't want to see the cars, so we've tucked them behind the building, and we tried to make it concealed. The items that we're going to emphasize here are we've got a reduction in vehicular parking spaces for reasons. We want to promote bicycle usage. We'd like to have a zip car station so that students or tenants can share and rent the car for the day to go to the grocery store and come back. There is on-street parking, and it is for permit in a lot of areas. And then there's also availability to off-site parking. So each of those items is something that we feel strongly about, and that's why the parking that we are providing is not completely per the current zoning for the number of beds and the number of units. I'll let you go ahead and... Yeah, so the next... Yeah, oh, you're going to hit that one? Okay.
Yeah, so that would, I guess, bring us around to going ahead and having a rehash of the requested waivers in this proposal. The first being the floor area ratio. It has been reduced from the previous design. It's now at a ratio of 1.4 versus a requirement of 0.9 in the R5 district. We have adhered to 1.4. We settled on that because that is the limit for the R6 district. So we've made it our goal to get the project aligned with that, because we feel like for a high density residential district, R6 is probably the model. So we have reduced the floor area ratio to 1.4. It's still over 0.9, so that's why it is a waiver requested. The building height is also a request. The requirement is 35 feet. We're requesting that the building be allowed to be 41 feet because of the fact that it is not significantly taller than anything else in the neighborhood, and it's actually very close to in size, and actually is a good transition between the higher density areas towards the lower density areas. The third item, the front yard encroachment, is basically because of the front stoops. The building itself is within its right. It's within the setback. What is not in the setback, as it should be, are the stoops. Those are not supposed to be extending into the setback. At least it's for new structures that's not allowed per zoning. But we feel that it's an important feature for this, and it actually does lend to the character that we're trying to emulate for the building. Number 4, the open space ratio. The previous request was for I believe 0.13. We've increase the open space to a ratio of 0.23 versus the requirement for R5 of 0.3. I would point out that the R6 zoning requirement is 0.25, so we're very, very close to that requirement. And then again, I wanted to point out of how we have actually, the quality of the open space on this proposal we think is very good because of congregating the open space into nice sized spaces so people can actually use them. And then finally on the parking ratio, the requirement for this according to R5 would be 1/2 of a space per bed. We are actually at, and that's an average. That's not over everything, but for our project, it works out to be on average, it's a 1/2 a space per bed, and we're actually providing 0.3 spaces per bed, which is actually an improvement over the last proposal, but it's not quite to the same level as the zoning requirement. But in all of these cases, we feel like this does lend itself well to being considered an R6 structure, which we feel like is a good model for high-density residential and in this location.
Just one last thing on that. We've got, as Jacob mentioned, we've got more parking for bicycles than would be required, a significant amount more. We'd like to provide on the Nevada side a bike station that could be used by anybody, and it's a thing where you have tools that hang down and you can actually repair your bike if you want to. We thought also about maybe 1 or 2 spaces for an electric car for one of the parking stalls, one or 2 of the stalls, and so those are 2 or 3 other things that we'd like to mention. That again, we're trying to get away from providing the dependency on cars for this development.
Right.
So
and there were some other sustainability features that we didn't cover. They weren't really readily demonstratable in the images that you saw, but we've discussed a more sustainable approach to this facility where we would work for rainwater harvesting and use of that for irrigation, and things like recycled materials for as much of the building products as possible, those types of things. And then right along with that was charging stations for electric vehicles is also a sustainable feature.
So the last slide is just a comparison. We just wanted to show what the size of the first one, the Lincoln Plaza, was emulating, and then the new design. So as you can see, it's greatly reduced. And I just wanted to run through. You got floor area ratio, the square footage, the open space, and number of units and spaces. So that's just a quick comparison side by side that this client has listened, and this is our new shot at this. That's all we have.
It's clear that you had the R6 requirements always in mind as you worked through the checklist.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that you don't have a comparison on is on the height. If it were R6, what would the legal height be?
I believe R6, you go to a requirement where it measures from the center line,
Yeah,
of
center
the
line to street.
to the facade.
Yeah.
And if we went through that, we actually probably would not even be able to use that because you would come up with about like 100-foot limit. We wouldn't even be able to do that for the
Yeah.
building code purposes. So we didn't feel like that was one that we had to press to the limit on.
So you're saying that, I mean, one possibility would be to rezone this property R6 and not go through a PUD and then just do it to R6. So I'm just curious, if it were R6, you're saying on that standard, the height could be?
That would probably be a little bit out of character because
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
height would be very, very, very high and would be a much more drastic change.
Thank you.
The stoops
Mhm.
are not required for multiple exits.
No.
How do they affect your open space ratio?
They affect the open space ratio because we are not allowed to count the space that they occupy as open space because it's paved and not
Okay.
usable.
Yeah.
And so we are not able to utilize any of the frontage along Lincoln Avenue for open space. We could probably use some, but it's just so broken up that it hinders us from able to call that open space all
Okay.
along Lincoln.
So let me push it a little further. If there were fewer stoops, you could meet the open space requirements of R5 plausibly.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
When you mentioned that, it made me wonder. One of the questions I remember that had come up before was having problems people have with flooding and inadequate drainage in the neighborhood. How could you, and we've given comparisons here about building size, could you address the difference between the previous proposal and this proposal in terms of the increase or decrease in permeable space versus paved space?
Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of the amount of area that's occupying the site, we have, I wonder if there's as I mentioned before, we've tried to group the open space into some larger clusters. So I will have to run the data to find the exact amount of difference.
Yeah.
I would say I don't think that we've drastically reduced. I think we have reduced it some. But we do still have surface parking, and that occupies a great portion of this. So I think that whereas the previous proposal, there was probably a lot of building roof area that was imposed on the site, we maybe now don't have as much roof, but there is still some paving, which we could remediate that by turning that into impervious type paving. So we have that. At least we have that option when it's paving versus a roof. So I don't
Yeah.
know the exact data on the comparison.
I
there,
don't
though.
either.
Mr. Otto?
Have you done a study of the capacities of the sanitary sewer to have the increased flow that's going to result from this sort of occupancy?
We do not have an official study done yet on that, no. We have just now gotten the unit counts, and that can be done at this point. It has not been done yet.
Will it be done before this comes back as an official, before we're asked to take action?
Yes, we will get you that information.
Thank you, Mr. Otto. Anything further? All right. Oh, Mr. Hopkins?
Urbana lot at 811 South Lincoln. Remind me where that is.
Yeah, it's
I'm
pretty
try-
far away.
Oh.
Couple blocks. Is it closer than it looks on the map?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's.
Oh, okay.
It's just south of
Okay.
Jimmy John's.
Right.
Is an Urbana lot,
Yes.
Right.
not a university lot.
Oh,
Eh,
Okay.
yeah, that's.
great. All right. Anything further? Last call. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Now, if anyone cares to address the Plan Commission on this, this is not, again, not a public hearing. It's a study session. But if you'd like to add to anything that we've gotten from your letters or bring anything else to light, you can have 5 minutes and just approach in an orderly fashion and state your name for the record.
And sign too, or no? We don't have to sign? because-
Yeah, go ahead and sign.
Okay.
That would be good.
My name is Esther Pat. I live at 706 South Kohler Avenue, which is the corner of Kohler and Nevada, 2 blocks east of the proposed building, and I'm going to just talk about one issue, which is parking. I've lived in the neighborhood for 41 years. I was a city council member for 11 years, and parking was the bane of my existence. And things have gotten worse. As you know, I'm not going to read you every word that I wrote here. You've got it in writing. The neighborhood is very densely populated, and years of construction without sufficient parking has made things worse, to the point that there is virtually no place to park on the street overnight on the first 2 blocks east of Lincoln, on the streets just north of and south of Nevada. I walk to Campus Recreation Center a lot from my house, and just Tuesday morning, the first day of classes this semester, I've spent my life counting these parking spaces and cars. There are 11 parking spaces on the street on the 700 block of Nevada, and 9 on the 800 block. The 9 on the 800 block are always filled, and you betcha Tuesday morning they were filled again. On Nevada, 1 of the 11 spaces was open, but 10 were filled. And in fact, there are 9 people who live on the 700 block of Nevada who buy permits from the city so that the block fills up quickly. I mostly want to speak, well, just about 2 things. One, I want to say, this isn't in writing, but for close to 40 years, I've been coming to meetings here and listening to people who own cars talk about how students shouldn't. And just like, stop it already. There are people who bike. If you know Charlie Smythe, city council member, I don't know if any of you have ever seen the man drive a car. He bikes everywhere, but he owns a car. And that's really the issue, is where do people who own their car keep their car overnight? Even if they bus and bike, etc. Also, you might think Lincoln and Nevada has fantastic bus service during the day, Monday through Saturday. But nights and weekends, the only bus that stops at Lincoln and Nevada, think women's safety and not walking alone at night, the only bus is the 22 Illini, which goes to the Illini Union. It takes 20 minutes to get to the Illini Union. It just goes around campus and then up North Lincoln. So you have to ride a bus for 20 minutes to get to the Illini Union to get on a bus to go anywhere you want to go at night, whereas during the day you just walk 4 or 5 blocks to pick up the right bus. So that's why one of the many reasons people have cars. But the big question is just how many cars do people have? We've been hearing, students have far fewer cars, and the proposal says, well, the parking needs aren't that great based on new developments. I don't remember the exact wording. I went out and counted. I got from the city the list of how many people are buying permits right now, this year, to park on the street on each 100 block. They didn't give me the exact addresses. And I went and counted how many bedrooms in each building and how many parking spaces. And there is a chart on the second page of what I passed out to you that I found real interesting, because some of it wasn't as bad as I thought it was, and some is worse. 1 block north of Lincoln in Nevada, at Lincoln in Oregon, the 800 block, there are 26 cars for 50, if you assume 1 person per bedroom, 26 cars for 50 bedrooms. 2 blocks south at 812 West Iowa, which is just 1 apartment building, has 12 2-bedroom apartments, 24 bedrooms. There are only 8 parking spaces under the building, but each space takes 2 cars. And I don't remember anyone ever walking by that place and not seeing the parking lot full, including yesterday about 1:30, 15 of the 16 cars were there. So 67% of the students who live 2 blocks south of this building we're talking about have a car that they park there at the building. 700 block of Nevada, I'm not really asking you to factor this in and do an averaging, but everyone on the 700 block of Nevada has a car. 28 bedrooms, 19 off-street parking spaces, 9 by permits. I will point out that 22 of those 28 bedrooms are 1-bedroom apartments that are unfurnished, and usually unfurnished attracts a little bit older crowd, older like 25 as opposed to 19 or 20, but more of those people are probably graduate students and non-students, so they're even going to have more cars. 800 block of Illinois Street, and there's a couple buildings there that are new, 62.3% of the bedrooms have cars. I combined 6 buildings on Green and Busey because there are 2 apartment complexes that are comprised of 1 building on Green and 1 on Busey, and they share parking lots. So I just added the 6 buildings, bedrooms, all the parking spaces for all their lots, and added the 24 permits that are purchased to park on the street by people of those 3, and we found 54% have cars, and then 500 block of Busey, 53%. I did not go, there are a few other apartment buildings I didn't include in this because they're on a block with group housing and like a fraternity or something, and that is what, and I can't tell who bought the permit, so I'm not trying to exaggerate this, but it seems quite clear to me, just based on those numbers, that the zoning requirement of 1 space for every 2-bedroom is not unreasonable. It actually still falls under what the actual demand is, which is why we have so many cars on the street. And In my building where I live, mostly the people are non-students, but the last 5 years there have been 6 students in that building. Every one of them had a car. Across the street from me is a duplex with 5 bedrooms. Every single year, I've lived at that corner for 18 years, and every year there are at least 4 cars parked at this duplex that is occupied by students, sometimes 5 or 6. Last May, I spoke with 2 students who lived at 804 South Lincoln, which is one of the properties that will be demolished for this. 6 students living in a 6-bedroom duplex had 6 cars. If only 25 spaces are put in and there are 83 bedrooms, based on these figures, taking the lowest estimate of 52%, giving this waiver of parking that they're asking for will put at least 19 cars on the streets. And these are streets that, one and all, even the ones that have only single-family homes, there are not more than 10 or maybe in some places 11 parking spaces on any one street that has 12 houses. So 19 spaces is going to be 2 more blocks filled with cars so that the homeowners who live there can never have company who are not younger people capable of walking 3 blocks from their car to the dinner party. I mean, seriously, this is what I've lived with for 11 years, people complaining about my guests have no place to park, and the older people especially being concerned. If it's the higher estimate, like the 2/3, this could be putting 30 more cars on the street for one development. Whatever else you do, please, 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 just accept the reality, whether you agree with it or not. I don't know this for a fact, though, but every one of you owns a car, or your household has a car. Provide the needed parking, respect the zoning that is there, that is in place because of the need. And of all the places in the city of Urbana, there is probably no residential area that has more of a need for new development to provide sufficient parking, because we really are just totally overrun by cars. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? State your name and sign the paper. That would be great.
So, good evening. My name is Pierre Moulin. I live at 806 West Nevada, just next to the proposed development. I live there with my family. There are many single-family houses on this block. I live in one of them. I've been living there for 21 years. By the way, every day I walk to my office. Been doing that for 21 years, and I own a car as well. Okay, so it's very typical. I cannot agree more with what Esther had to say. So there are many things in this proposal that we just saw that are an improvement over the previous mega project. But there are still many misrepresentations of reality. So on the slides, I saw many buildings on the other side of Lincoln, which are completely different from the houses and so on that we have on our side of Lincoln. What I find most remarkable is when I saw the map of the comprehensive plan, somehow what is missing is a very important sentence. I mean, these are 7 very simple words on that map. Is the Ordinance 2009-01004. It simply says that about the Lincoln-Busy corridor, preserve these uses as they now exist while precluding further encroachment of higher density buildings into this unique residential area. So any discussion about R6 and so on, I find it completely inappropriate for our neighborhood. We have single-family homes there and so on. As Esther mentioned, it's simply not designed for a massive influx of people with cars and so on. It's completely out of character. The flow-to-area ratio is hugely above the FAR for R5 development. The building height, again, is somewhat misleading because the next building was only 38 feet and the maximum proposed height is 43. So I don't see any reason to accept these waivers. What I found remarkable too is the number of tenants that will be there. There will be 83 bedrooms. In the original project, there were 117. You've noticed the square footage for the total building is much, much smaller. So how is that done? Simply by packing more people per square foot. Before, they were mostly 1 and 2 bedroom apartments in the previous design, and the developer mentioned that as a strong point, that it will ensure greater quietness because the people who live in 1 and 2 bedroom apartments are quieter people. Now, the vast majority of people will be living in 3 and 4 bedroom apartments. So we all know this is what leads to very large parties, lots of noise, lots of undergraduate students, and so on. The big open area that we see in the plan outside will be like a gigantic party, okay? Every evening and so on during the summer, we'll have a great party to entertain all the neighbors on our block and on Busy and beyond. I find it completely inappropriate. The density is simply way above what we want and what the comprehensive plan has mandated for our area. I will not speak more about the parking plan, which is completely inadequate. Really second Esther. Every rental house I know that has, say, 4 bedrooms has at least 3 cars. I see no reason to grant a waiver on this request. When it comes to the sewer system and so on, we do have an engineering report on record. It is the Burns Clancy engineering report, a very high quality professional report that was entered in the record last summer. It's also, I also made a copy of it available in my letter this morning. And the report makes it very clear that the area does not support this development. Simply the risk to the sewer system are way too large. And I've seen nothing in the application that even attempts to counter that. So, just in summary, it is quite clear to us that the scale of the project violates the comprehensive plan and will be hugely detrimental to the quality of life of the families and the people who live on that block and on Busy Street.
All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Otto?
There's reference to your Burn Clancy
Attachment,
report.
yeah.
Could you circulate that? I assume you have it. Could you send it electronically or something to the rest of us commissioners?
Yes.
It's mentioned, but not included. Thank you. Next. And again, if you could just state your name and sign the paper.
Okay, thank you for holding this session. My name is Mary Pat McGuire. I live at and own 804 West Nevada. As a Wuna resident and a owner of the area, I want, with my neighbors, to be able to consider a project that meets the comprehensive plan and its attached zoning laws. I want to be able to review an application that has met the criteria and the documentation that is required by a PUD, and we have not been able to do this through this revised application. In common site planning practice, there are basically 3 levels of planning analysis, which many of you are aware of. There's the site area or the context, and then the larger, what you might call the area of concern. And the applicant's package really only addresses the first level, the site. Does it fit? And we know that it doesn't fit very well. It doesn't fit the plan, it doesn't fit zoning, and it's asking for a very large waiver. And those are things that we all need to wrestle with in this situation, especially since there's not been a justification provided yet for why this is being applied for as a PUD, because there's really not a kind of exchange in return for these variances. So more concerning than the project is that there's continues to be no analysis of the site area impact. The immediate circulation, traffic, views, noise, et cetera, are all serious issues. And there's no analysis of the area of concern, which has to do with the larger infrastructural and environmental impact. So we feel that the city should be concerned about this. It should be proactively managing this, and these situations should be studied now. And I believe that legally they're required to be studied and included as part of this application. So my specific questions are the following. 1, where are the required studies and documents that are required by this PUD? For example, missing from the preliminary PUD is a site inventory and analysis, a good one that we can rely on. Missing from the final PUD application materials are a very important architectural elevation, the building facade drawing of the eastern elevation facing the neighborhood. It's not even in the packet and it wasn't presented today. Curious. There's no stormwater plan, there's no utilities plan, there's no lighting information, and there's no development plan. These are all required to be a part of the PUD. I think also we can appreciate the traffic strategies, as they were called, but really they're where to put the car strategies. Because I think that the architects are being truthful in trying to generate more foot traffic. But I would ask secondarily, has the city considered doing a traffic study to analyze daily trip generation by cars and circulation safety because of the increased activity of added cars, bikes, and now 80 new pedestrians at this intersection? At the project scale, my questions are the following. What is the configuration of the east elevation facade facing the neighborhood? This is a key architectural drawing that doesn't appear anywhere in the documents. Why is the building encroaching on Nevada Street with such a small setback instead of matching the setback of the other buildings on Nevada, including the apartment on the corner directly to the north? This kind of physical footprint is eroding not just the character of Nevada Street, but the spatial continuity there. What is the justification of proposing a building at R6 zoning when the parcels are zoned R5? I don't think we've really still heard this argument. And lastly, please tell us what is the most important benefit of this project to the community based on the criteria of a PUD. And please don't tell us density, as it was stated in the application. So to summarize, I want to concur strongly with Michael Plewa's letter that he submitted to the city today about the timeline for this project. There is a lack of due diligence on studying and preparing for the impacts of such a project, at least from what we can read from the documents that were submitted. Every parcel is connected to every other parcel in our urban community. Nothing is in isolation. And the impact of this project on the scale, or the impact, pardon me, of the project on the scale and the beauty of our streets, shared infrastructure, and the shared environment is not being taken seriously yet. It would be very hard to consider the project at this point without an urban infrastructural, environmental, and safety review. And these are very practical matters and I think very reasonable questions that we're asking. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything, gentlemen? Nope. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yeah, if you could state your name and sign a paper. Thank you.
My name is Michael Pleva. I have been at Urbana residence for 42 years. Listening to this discussion today brought to mind a saying by a very famous scientist, Dr. Carl Sagan, in his response to pseudoscience. In his discussion, he said, great claims or exceptional claims require exceptional evidence. Well, this applies to this PUD. Great requirements of waivers for zoning and parking, great requirements to change zoning laws from R4 and R5. Remember, one of the lots is R4. Required great benefits to the neighborhood. A PUD is supposed to bring something more than just a building. That's why we have PUDs. Okay, that's where we stand at. And so we can apply this to this project here. Green Street Realty purchased the existing houses with full knowledge of the current zoning restrictions. 3 lots at R5, 1 lot at R4. They contend unless they can construct a large, high-density building within the Lincoln-Busey corridor, the use of the property is not profitable. And this was also stated in the previous PUD proposal. The project is incompatible with medium to high-density development. This is an approach by the developer to game the system. If somebody proposed a PUD in Mr. Saunders' neighborhood, he would be a strong advocate of Urbana zoning laws. This is the owner of Green Street properties. I contend that we, the people in the Woona neighborhood, have the same issues apply to us. If this PUD actually met the goals of a PUD, one would think that the Woona neighborhood would be in great support, would be dancing in the streets. However, this proposal is an affront to the surrounding neighborhood. The development requires a multitude of variances and zoning laws changes because it is merely a development to maximize profit while it consumes the externalities of a high quality of life and threatens a stable neighborhood. And this neighborhood is not just some kind of eclectic mix of old houses thrown together. It's the only American Planning Association award-winning neighborhood south of I-80. Okay? That's something that we have to remember. Every time Urbana shows a brochure of the city, it includes the Wuna neighborhood. The project is incompatible with the requirements for a PUD as well as R5. It provides no value to the city or neighborhood. The negative impact on the Nevada Street side of the project would be paid by the diminishment of the neighborhood. The open activity space would be a source of noise that would severely impact the quality of life of nearby residents on Busey Avenue. Instead of renovating or building compatible structures under the R5 zoning limits, this PUD represents a large complex housing of 83 tenants and would increase the population density by 400%. The structure would severely reduce the diversity in the neighborhood as single families leave. The foundation of a stable Wuna neighborhood it requires single families in the neighborhood, and in fact, it leads to the diversity that we all enjoy. Such apartments are going to be populated by individuals we believe that it's going to increase the noise and the pressure of more cars in the neighborhood and substantially reduce the quality of life for the neighbors. The American Planning Association doesn't give awards to mega structures like this. Okay? The parking plan violates the Urbana regulations. I can't do better than what Esther did. There's an excellent reason why we have density parking mandates. Increasing the density, the population density by 400% at this site would have the project residents and visitors roaming around the entire neighborhood, competing for parking spaces, increasing traffic congestion and noise. The proposed PUD reduces everyone's quality of life and runs contrary to both the spirit of the comprehensive plans and the notions of smart, sustainable development. The suggestion that students do not bring cars to the neighborhood is insulting to the common experience by residents of our neighborhood. One only has to compare the streets in June and July versus the fall and spring terms at the university. And I'm not against students. I'm a professor, for crying out loud. But I know the impact on a resident, on the residents in the area.
Sir, you're getting near the end of your time.
I
If you could
realize
bring it
that,
home.
but even the Supreme Court can't take away my First Amendment rights. I would like to continue. Let me just
5 minutes is it. That's it, sir. Sorry.
okay.
Just wrap it up.
One of the very important things that you have to remember is that an engineering analysis has been completed on the municipal sewage problems in the area. And it was stated that a large, high-density building at this site would overwhelm the wastewater removal by the current sewage system. Also, there's no discussion about the storm sewers. We have had increased levels of flooding in the Wuna neighborhood because of storm sewers being overflowed, primarily because of development.
All right, thank you.
Why don't you give the developers 5 minutes of time restrictions?
Thank you. If you could state your name and sign the roster, that would be great.
Good evening. My name is Louise Cooney. I live at 801 West Indiana. It's the southwest corner of Indiana and Busey. I'm going to read a prepared statement to make sure that I don't go over my time. First of all, I'm here to support my neighbors, particularly the neighbors that are closest to the proposed planned unit development. My family has invested very heavily in the Woona neighborhood at the encouragement of both the City of Urbana and the Historic Preservation Commission. However, I must say that we are starting to wonder if our trust was misplaced in both the city and the Historic Preservation Commission, because we're starting to wonder if our investment was not a good idea. We purchased a beautiful, large, historic house at the corner of Indiana and Busey in 2012, and we did what I would consider to be a top-of-the-line, historically respectful renovation, spending a fortune on every detail. We considered it to be both the right thing to do for the neighborhood, because we love the neighborhood, and a good investment. We based this decision on the city's stated commitment to historic preservation in many documents, namely its Historic Preservation Ordinance, the Lincoln-Busey Corridor Plan, the Downtown to Campus Plan, the naming of Woona as a historic neighborhood and its winning of a national award, as my neighbors have discussed, and the City of Urbana Comprehensive Plan. Our house was granted historic status by the city, and we won both the PACA Heritage Award and state recognition as a certified historic renovation. However, we are starting to question the City of Urbana's commitment to its promises to its residents and to us as heavy investors in this neighborhood. We consider all of the documents that I just mentioned as promises from the City of Urbana to its residents, particularly to its property owners. Repeatedly, neighbors in Woona have been bombarded with one request after another to make major changes to a wide variety of zoning ordinances. I have spent much, much more time here on these issues than all the other homes I've ever owned. I have to say that we've owned 3 other houses in different municipalities for 29, almost 30 years, and we have only had one request in those 29 years for variance, and somebody wanted to move a play set 1 or 2 feet closer to the lot line. This is the norm, okay? My parents owned a house for 45 years, and they had one request in 45 years for a pool, a foot or 2 difference. My in-laws owned a house in Oak Park. Now, Oak Park is very similar to Woona in terms of the age of the houses, the density, etc. Okay? They, within one block, they had a very large apartment building. They had a very large Catholic high school, Fenwick High School, which draws from all over the whole Chicago metro area. It's kind of like a gifted magnet school. And they had a church at the end of their block. And they told me that they never had one zoning request in 50 years. Now, I consider this to be evidence that these other cities have respect for people. They have respect for neighbors. I understand that variances are normal, but this amount of variances and the percentage like that we're looking at on this chart of the variances that are requested is just, it's unheard of in other cities. Absolutely unheard of. It is my opinion and my concern that the City of Urbana not only allows but perhaps encourages by lack of enforcement or lack of objection such wild variances on a regular basis. And neighbors, I would speak to you, this is not the norm, this is not usual, and this does not have to be allowed. If we feel that a proposed variance or project is detrimental to our property values or to the enjoyment of our property, we should file a written protest, we should speak to our elected officials, and we should speak openly at these types of meetings. If our elected officials and our city staff members will not support us, then perhaps it's time for them to reconsider whether or not they truly represent our interests and want to continue working for us. Neighbors, this is only one of many issues which will present itself to us in the near future. And I've discussed this with you gentlemen before. On our block, bordered by Lincoln, Michigan, Busey, Indiana, we will soon hear of a church that wants to convert a building that currently houses 84 students into one that can hold 412 students. Neighbors from that block are here to support those around this issue now, and we hope you'll support us when our time comes. However, overall, we must ask ourselves, when will this stop? When will we say no? And when will we send a message to developers that they shouldn't even try this, that this is just ridiculous, and that we're tired of it? Is Mr. Sanders here?
Address the Plan Commission, ma'am.
Yes. Mr. Sanders, Saunders, I'm sorry, excuse me. Yes. I have an MBA and I applaud you on your business acumen and your success.
Ma'am, please address the Plan Commission. This is not a
I'm
cross-examination.
sorry. I didn't hear you. I
Sorry.
thought you were talking about time.
Sorry.
Excuse me.
No. Well, you're there too.
Yes.
Wrap it up.
I understand that everyone wants to maximize return on investment, but we're begging you not to do so within the city of Urbana's, we're begging you to do so within the city of Urbana's given parameters. Please bring us back another proposal with no or perhaps minimal variances, not these large variance requests. And finally, Plan Commission members, just because this proposal is more palatable than the last one does not mean that it needs to be approved. I'm a nurse. If I call the physician and say, guess what, I've got great news for you. The fever went down from 104 to 102. No one is going to be applauding. Please respect us as property owners and realize that your decision will impact not only our investments, but also the homes that we love. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? And if you could state your name and sign the roster, that would be great.
My name is Ruth Ross. I live at 805 South Busey. I've been in town approximately 57 years. I've lived at that address for close to 40 years. I'm coming to you with a different perspective than you've heard. They're very well presented and very well researched. But I must say, when the gentlemen were up here talking about, for example, parking, when they put all of these cars in their back, they're putting them in almost on my property line because I live right next to this project. I also would like to mention that I'm not sure that the noise doesn't increase with that many cars. If you want to sit on your front porch and there's a car coming down the street, they have the radio turned up as high as they can and their windows down in the summertime. So I don't think the parking is something that any of you would be happy to have on your block or in your backyard. I really don't have much to say, but I have a question regarding A0.2. I was wondering if you could tell me what the area behind my property, it juts out into looks like into my property line, and I wondered if you could tell me what that was. It's A0.2. You see the little area that juts out? I'm right here, and this little area juts out. And I wondered why that was that way. Because it seems to me the property line goes straight through there.
I mean, we as staff can check our records. I'm not sure if the architect has any comment on the property line alignment or not, but certainly we'll take a look at that to make sure that is accurately reflected.
And I did want to mention the face that faced towards Lincoln Street. When I first saw that picture, it reminded me of the row houses in Chicago. It reminds me of the row houses in Brooklyn, New York. And here we are in Little Urbana having something like that. I really don't have a lot to say, but I am against the project, especially as it stands right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you have a question for Mr. Storr? Ma'am? I'm sorry, one of the commissioners has a question for you. If you could come back up.
Right. You said you, I did. Good. Okay. Do you, you said you live right next to this development.
Yes.
And I wondered, do you get any surface runoff during rainstorms?
Actually, I would love to have the name of the people who stood here, because whenever I get something in my basement, I'd love to be able to call them and tell them I need some help, because I do. I have water in the basement, and I have had sewage come up, and I hope that project will come through. Anything else?
Mr. Storr? You're, all right, thank you, man. Anyone else?
Hello, my name's Leslie Sherman. I live at 513 West Oregon Street. And although I'm not a direct neighbor of this, where the project is proposed to be done, I'm in the zone of the overflow parking that will suddenly happen, where right now we have about 3 or 4 cars on in my block that are parked on the street regularly. All those people will be parking on my street. All the 20 to 30 or 15 to 30 additional permits. Adding permits, by the way, is not an acceptable environmental improvement to it. My understanding of the PUD, and this is one of the things I was highly disappointed. I have to say, I thought this was a vast improvement than last time. But I agree with my neighbors that it still does not meet a PUD requirement, a PUD requirement. It also, they're asking for R6. The comprehensive plan, these were zoned as R5 and R4 for a reason, so that they wouldn't be treated as R6. And so I'm asking you to please continue to respect how they are zoned and not to approve such wide variances to say, oh, well, let's, instead of really zoning, I thought it was an excellent question that you had. Why aren't you just asking these to be rezoned? Well, why? Because they would not get them approved. Because it's not appropriate for the neighborhood, it's not appropriate for the location. They are R5 and they are R4, and they should therefore fit that. And to treat them as R6s or to do comparisons to R6s is a little ridiculous, and really trying to convince you that really there are R6s. And that's one of my issues with the comprehensive plan of calling it high density. Well, it's high density residential, or actually for this neighborhood, high density is an R5. So relative to the location, it was considered high density, but that's R5. That's what R5 is about for our neighborhood, for this zone. So I'm asking you to please respect that and to keep that in mind when you do your voting, when you finally get to vote on this. Also, I am also concerned about the flooding that happens. If you go and look at our sewer system, if you go on a heavy rain, you'll see that even at Kohler, which is Kohler is at the bottom of the hill from Nevada, past Busey. You will see on Nevada, I'm on Oregon, which is just one street up from that, north of that, and you'll see those drains are constantly getting covered with debris as well as other things, and we have flooding on Court in that area in the drains regularly. When you add the extra density of that much pavement, let alone that much ground cover, it's just not reasonable, and you're putting an impact on the neighborhood. This is an older neighborhood. It has older houses. It doesn't have the nice new cement basements that exist, and they are often wet basements, but there's a level of wetness that is reasonable based upon our development that we're doing. So I ask that you please respect that, and I just wanted to say that although I do appreciate Mr. Saunders and the Green Street Realty for trying to listen to the neighborhood and give feedback and come back with a plan that was more reasonable. At the same time, it doesn't fit the zoning. It is not an R6 area, so I hope that you will still decline it if it comes forward as is. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Dan Newman. I live at 612 West Green Street on the corner of Green and Kohler. Just have 3 points.
Can you sign the paper?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thanks, Mr. Newman.
First is, when I look at the pictures, I really appreciate the features of the new proposal that are similar to the structure right next door on Lincoln. So I appreciate that it's almost a 3-story building. I prefer that, and I appreciate the gables. However, the proposed structure is a lot bigger than the one next to it, and a lot bigger than what's allowed by the R5. And so, to me, when I think about the zoning ordinance and how I, as a resident of the neighborhood, I think about it as kind of like a contract between me and the neighborhood for what the neighborhood's going to look like in the future. I think that the R5 is already really generous. So you can buy those properties and tear down all the houses that are on those properties and build something 2.5 times bigger in the current R5. But the developer doesn't want 2.5 times bigger. He or she wants 4 times bigger. And so why should we be considering 4 times bigger when the zoning it currently has is already generous? And this goes to one point I want to make about the argument of what is financially viable. So this argument is made in a lot of applications like this, but the quote for this one is, "Some concessions to the current zoning ordinance are required to make this development financially viable." The notion of financial viability is, as an argument for change for waivers and variances, is a specious argument unless you have numbers. I need to know how much profit will this person make if those buildings are 2.5 times bigger than what they are now. Without telling me what the profit is, I can't accept any argument that it's not financially viable to be 2.5 times bigger. You have to go 4 times bigger. So I get confused about financial viability as an argument, and I don't think it should be accepted without some kind of balance sheet that explains what the exact numbers are. Thanks.
Anything further? No. Thank you. Sir, did you start to get up? Were you going to come forward, or are you just letting Mr. Newman out? Oh, okay. I didn't know if you were jockeying for position or... Anyway, if hearing no further people wish to address the Plan Commission, again, this is not a public hearing, so it's just an intake session. And I don't know if... so we'll close the public input part of it and ask if do we want to discuss, do we want to just chew on it? Read the testimony further, the proposal further, et cetera. Mr. Otto?
I'm curious about the questions that were raised by, I guess it was Mary Pat McGuire in her written submission, or in her submission. And she points out, and I noticed it lacking too, and I neglected to ask them about it. There's no east face of the building that was shown. There's no stormwater plan, no utilities plan, no traffic study, and so on. I guess that makes it hard to hold this hearing when the
It's not a hearing.
information is in. It's hard to hold a study session because those infrastructure questions are crucial to evaluating the proposal. Do you know whether those, is it fair to ask them whether they exist and they have them along and just didn't want to take the time, or?
I can ask them. I think Ms. Pearson had said earlier the application's not completed yet. Do you want to address Mr. Otto about when you would be able to make some of those things available, or when you might think the application will be completed? It's going to be ballpark. I mean, you know.
First of all, we got to find out if it's required.
Sure.
It's being requested.
Whatever the zoning ordinance requires.
Yeah, I mean, we have to, we'll follow whatever, so we would have to
Sure.
provide it. I don't know.
Is this an open discussion or
No, this is not an open discussion. This is just, so the zoning ordinance has requirements. the city will make sure that they follow the requirements. And I agree with you. I'd like to see almost everything that was mentioned. I think it's crucial. Mr. Hopkins?
So, given that this is a study session, I think it's very difficult to deliberate.
I think we
because
can't deliberate, yeah.
We can't really say much.
No.
So I suggest that we adjourn the study session and wait for a formal
Wait
public
for
hearing.
a formal application of public hearing. I would agree with you.
And
Any
I mean, if
objection?
there's anything specific to suggest to staff, which is, I think, what Mr.
Sure,
Otto was
sure.
doing, then I think
Right,
we,
that's right,
we should
yeah.
do that, but I don't think we can really deliberate.
You have a suggestion, or?
I'm rather curious about changes in stormwater runoff. We just went through a big bunch of hearings, and now we're paying a stormwater fee and so forth. It'd be really helpful if we heard something about how the new structure is going to affect stormwater runoff. And I'm very interested as well in how this would affect the sanitary as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Anything further for staff? No, in that case, thank you everyone for your testimony. Thank you for the developers for your presentation, and we'll look forward to seeing you at some future point. So I'll close the study session on that note, and therefore, having no other business, we're adjourned.